great to have this other panel after what, in fact, the first panel almost started talking about training quite a bit as they were talking about fighting negativity. So let me start with you, Prateek. Would you like to settle in? Yeah, it's you were responsible in many ways for introducing this whole competency framework within Wipro, and you were on our hottest young executive list for doing a lot.
You're reminding me.
So it's great to have you with us and share your thoughts now that you've transitioned in a sense out of the HR role, but you are very passionate about this space. What does it take as you go higher up the ranks, in terms of training? Do you feel that constant input is necessary? And yes, if it is necessary, then how are companies doing enough about it?
So I think, thanks, Sami. Goes without saying, I think that's pretty much the lifeline of all organizations. More so for very, very people-driven organization, and I think it's understood, commonsensical. So let me just break it up. The way I see the issue today and the way the training gets addressed in the organization. So the question, the theme was that whether India Inc. is doing enough, right, towards training. My own personal view is, yes, it's doing, but to a very large extent is misdirected, right? And let me just explain why I actually feel that way. And speaking, some of it is through experience in Wipro over the years. This has been the constant tone and tenor of the conversation all along, that how do we get so many people coming in through the gates every year and getting them trained? And then you begin to think about it, is that the role of the organization, right? I mean, to be able to create and train and retain army of programmers? Or is it it's a bigger institutional responsibility, which should be resting for people who actually certify the colleges, right? And being able to just ensure that these are the right places of learning. And of the academic institutes, who all of us know that they are woefully lacking in actually preparing them for the kind of skills which industry requires. So that's at an institutional level, where I see there is a gap. Therefore, large campuses, sprawling 250, 300 acres, fancy buildings, a lot of technology thrown in to be able to train 40, 50,000 people. I think there's a lot of wasted resources, if you ask me. That's not the role and the task of organization to get indulged in. I mean, we can't be silent beneficiary of trained talent, but our role is more in being able to get the context right, provide the right kind of domain, be able to prepare them for higher leadership roles, but it gets completely sidetracked. So at an institutional level, and that flowing from there at an organization level, there is certainly an issue. The second issue, which I heard the threads of those discussion even in the earlier panel, is, organizations are very, very efficiency driven at the end of the day, right? So therefore, to be able to, and I heard terms like reskilling, Manoj, you were referring to upskilling, and so what is the intent? The intent is that how do I actually make my resources absolutely productive? If I have visibility of certain billability to happen, if I don't find them, how can I actually quickly train them and get them addressed, right? And hence it's pretty much driven towards in terms of here and now. So it's a lot of training, right? So there's a dichotomy, and the dichotomy is that the boardroom discussion is about how you're enabling organizations to the future, and it's a sector which is changing and rechanging, and a lot of innovation needs to be brought in. But at a ground level, you are pretty much actually just focused on training, and there is a fundamental difference between training and learning, right? And so it's very ROI driven. So I will do something which can actually show me the return immediately. But the real development and where the real need is, that will actually play out over a period of time, and it is for the long haul. And I do not think organizations demonstrate that kind of patience, and to be able to make that sustained investment groom that cadre of people from within the organization. And so hence you are very much trapped in the here and now, and accordingly you make those shifts. So even I heard you talk about, how does when it's crunch time and you talk about in terms of cost, does training come under the lenses? It will, if you actually begin to see it as a spend item and not as an investment, right? And then at an individual level, certainly there is an onus, and we are all products of a very legacy-driven rote learning culture where we are actually told what is expected to be done, right? And so the classroom instruction will still be very much, how can you quickly actually give those instructions and get this 21-year-old to be ready to be actually deployed. And I think we have to actually move towards an environment where people are trained to actually learn by themselves, right? Much of it is going to actually happen outside of the classrooms. It's going to be a lot more self-paced. There is enough technology. Most of it is, again, misdirected, which is available in the organization. How people are able to actually get the information together and go into the classrooms to be able to go to the instruction to clarify the doubts and not to be told in terms of X, Y, Z skills, do it at the quickest possible. So it's a longish answer, but the issue where I see it, there's a lot of money being pumped in. My own view is it's misdirected, it's just missing out. The conversation which is happening at one level and what's happening at the ground level, it seems to be a divergence. There is an institutional role, a lot of lip service to it. And I have been involved in a few of the initiatives from my own organization in participating in how we can actually make a difference. And it's a big, huge task getting everyone onto the platform. And certainly at an individual level where the future of learning and training is going to be much different from what it is right now. And organizations were smart enough in realizing and driving their own employees to just become more alive to it are the ones who are likely to remain ahead.
Okay, you've actually, very interestingly, from a journalistic perspective, opened this can for me. You've talked about how people loosely sort of, and how, people should be ready while they are studying to be, employable in that sense. And really campuses not doing the job that they should be doing. And how companies really, do they really need to spend that kind of money in, making them job ready instantly. And I had a very interesting conversation with Manish, and he said that, companies have to actually spend that kind of money on people to make them, specific to the needs of their organization. It's a done thing everywhere. And so that's a given. I mean, if you hire from wherever, you have to spend that money to make that person relevant to the needs, your specific needs. Would you like to share, because you work at that?
And so I don't disagree with Manish, right?
Yeah. I actually made it, maybe I didn't articulate it. I don't think companies can manufacture their own employees. I think that's an expectation which...
The green light.
So I don't think companies can manufacture their own employees. I think that's been an unrealistic expectation. There's a difference between repair and prepare. You may distinguish that based on the opening balance of the child or the duration of the course. I think that, Gary Becker got the Nobel Prize for recognizing that the benefits of long-term human capital intervention go to society or the individual. See, there is a market failure in skill development or in corporate training. Companies are willing to pay for training or candidates, but they're not willing to pay for trained candidates because of Gary Becker's theory. Candidates are not willing to pay for training, they're willing to pay for a job. Banks of microfinance aren't willing to lend to the candidates unless a job is guaranteed. And training companies are unable to fill up. So the innovation lies at the intersection of employment. But it is a financing failure. It's not a delivery failure. I think there's enough innovation going on. Technology has been a big disappointment in training, at least. I agree with the president of Stanford a few weeks ago. He said that, we all know technology matters in education, we just don't know how. So I think before we oversell this whole MOOCs and technology in education. So the fundamental question in corporate training is who pays in a country where you can't have bonds. You know, if you pay for somebody and if he works for you for 2 years, it's okay. Or if he works for you for 3 years, it's probably fine. Both sides are better off. But I think there is no loan market in vocational training, a third-party market, primarily for the same reason that companies can repair them. You can't teach somebody in 3 months what they should have learned in 12 years. I think we've got to stop telling that lie, which we have many of us in skill development started off with that theory. You can't teach somebody in 3 months what they should have learned in 12 years or 15 years. So I think the repair, prepare, upgrade continuum, companies can intervene, they can put their resources to work in firm-specific skills, they can do last-mile repair, but they cannot substitute for the education system. That's just an unrealistic expectation which will not be met, and has actually, frankly, never been met anywhere in the world. I mean, of all the talk in vocational training or that companies shouldn't be all, the German minister of vocational training has had a bet with me saying that this cannot be done by the private sector. You're deluding yourself. The corporate sector cannot manufacture its own employees. So you'll have to figure out how to involve companies, but you'll have to figure out some other source of financing if you want to do this for 300 million people as India does.
Yeah, so Seema, you had again very interesting thoughts when we were talking before, and you were saying, companies do invest in, training people, but there's a difference when it comes to specific skills and the soft skills. And would you like to elaborate on those?
Right.
How do you measure them? How do you map them?
Right, but before that, I'd like to react a little bit to what I just heard, okay, right, on the panel from both Prateek and Manish. I think it's a question at the end of the day of choice, or rather lack of choice, right? And what we're doing at this point of time, right, from a training standpoint is, I mean, to some degree a substitute, right, for the lack of choice, for want of a better word, right? So there's a ton of investment that we make as an organization and at various levels, right, when we think about it from a life cycle of an employee and to the needs, right, at a corresponding level to us, whether it's technical skills, functional, domain skills, soft skills at various levels within the organization, right? One of the extremely successful programs that we have, again, it's not a complete substitute, but one of the extremely successful programs we have is the Cisco certifications, right? So whether it's a CCNA, CCNP, CITL, and so on and so forth, right? We have a very, very large third-party base out there, right, where a lot of employees eventually then, whether they're with Cisco, some of them end up joining Cisco, some of them do these certifications within Cisco, and in fact, we actually have a promotion track both for our R&D as well as for our services engineers, right, where their promotions are very often related to their certifications, just given the amount of rigor that goes into getting that certification. At the same time, we find that a large number of external professionals, and there are literally millions of them, right, they end up finding employment in other organizations that eventually support the industry that, we're a part of. So there is a fair amount of investment we make, which then goes somewhere, right, to replace that choice or lack of choice, so to speak. Now, coming back to the soft skills space, right, it kind of reminds me of the previous conversation, which is where is the time lag? Right, and largely because soft skills is not something, technical skills, well, one could argue it's relatively easier. There's a shorter time lag, but when you talk about soft skills, right, a lot of that has to do with, things like how do I communicate, what is my presence, right? It could be around how do I become an effective people manager, how effective am I as a leader, and various other roles, right, that I might end up playing within the organization. Now, some of that is heard, but not necessarily internalized at an immediate level. In many instances, one could hear it, right, also experience it. But once again, it's also the intent, right, of the person that comes into play. And again, there's an element of choice as a person, right, as a people manager. What do I choose to be? Am I choosing to treat this employee in a certain way only because the company is expecting me of it and I've, yes, been through certain classes and through certain expectation sets? Or, what is the value system I bring into play, right, when I treat that employee in a certain way? And so soft skills we find, right, is a far more complex and demanding area where, typically there's a fairly long time lag between, how you articulate your expectations, what you train the individual on, and what gets displayed, right, at the end of it, in that sense.
In a sense, it's very difficult to quantify and, put it into a certain process.
Actually, one could even quantify it, right? And I think many companies do that in different ways. For example, at Cisco, we have what we call things like Pulse Index, which actually give us, or 360 instruments or, other things, right? Which actually give us a measure or an indicator of how effective is a people manager or how effective a leader is. So there are many such instruments. But then the direct link between, say, a training intervention or a learning intervention, right, to how effective that person is, I think that link is a little bit more tenuous.
So, you know, to bring you in, it's interesting that the banking and finance sector, you know, has created virtually another, you know, you've invested, banks are going and training people, picking up and specifically training them for their needs. You know, what is the kind of experience that you have there? You think is enough being done, or this is just the beginning?
Well, connecting the dots, what Pratik talked about, for the banking industry in particular, there is a very pronounced gap between what the academic produces and what the industry wants. And talking about what Manish said, who finances for this? Traditionally, if you look at it in banking, maybe about 15 years back, you had this concept of probationary officer where the training was almost for a period of 12 to 18 months. That was a solid grounding where you gave complete training for a person to become a very seasoned banker with the hope he will be with you for a period of 15, 20 years. 20 years was the minimum service a person would put in. In today's context, it has changed because people do expect to be in organization for a shorter period of time. So what has really happened is that the model has changed. The changed from, typically where you hire and train to a model where you source, you enroll the person for a third-party program. He completes the training program, which is sponsored self by him, financed by the banks, and then he gets hired by the banking organization, which means that what we're looking for is essentially the first hour productivity. And the challenge for us is, and what we have to a reasonable extent achieved, is pushing the time and cost to the aspiring individual so that when he comes on board pretty much trained. And that is how the banking industry has addressed this gap. To a reasonable extent successful, because there is sort of a good number of institutions which provide these job-oriented programs, which are almost about 6 to 9 months, which prepares the person for the domain-specific knowledge areas. The specific challenge would be how do we sort of upskill or cross-skill people to move from maybe one area to another. And that's where I think there is a lot of efforts that we have put in making very structured tracks where we have identified feeder in and feeder out. And we have something called development tracks where people aspire, enroll, they get trained, and then they are prepared for the next sort of a role. It is still a challenge in terms of ensuring that the training is something which is offline. Training is something which is sort of provided much before the person comes in. He plugs in and plays and starts working. It has been to an extent successful for us, and I do believe some of the IT organizations are trying some of these models.
Would you like to respond to that IT is actually following some of the models that...
Yes, I don't see the challenges in the banking sector very different from what IT conventionally has gone through, and it takes me back to an initiative almost about 14, 15 years back, which we attempted and over a period of time has become very successful. And for the first time, we began to question this heavily engineering focused, intake in IT, which is very different from how it is in the rest of the world. And where they focus a lot more on multidisciplinary approach, and here it's, and maybe because our ability to have so many engineers coming out and the social pressure of more and more getting pushed into engineering. And we said, look, why don't we? And to be honest, at that point in time when we started, it was more from a cost perspective, right? Because we said, look, why don't we actually look at non-engineering simple graduates and look at what we could be doing. So we took them on, and pretty soon and the intention was very clear, we'll put them through a 3-year kind of a program, and they will work in live projects. We will have instructional inputs being given on 2 days a week, and we will take them through this curriculum over a period of 3 years. Hugely successful. Somewhere along we realized that's not enough to satiate the need for a degree too for them or for their parents. So we did a very successful tie-up with BITS Pilani, right? And today I do not have the count of number of people who have been through, but hugely successful, right, as a model. So yes, you do, organizations continue to actually evaluate whether their needs are going to be met, and certainly in a cost-effective manner. And you make your own judgment where you think you can, with the wherewithal of experience which resides in the organization, where you can independently intervene. Question is whether that's the best model, right? And I think I heard Manish say earlier, what becomes the organization role? And I completely agree. Organization role is to be able to give the organization context, the business context. You're preparing leaders. You're giving them multi-domain exposure, over a period of time, multi-geo exposure, multi-functional exposure, and preparing them to be well-groomed leaders down the line, right? And obviously the start is where you focus a lot on individual effectiveness, right? So the person is able to be more effective individual and hopefully individual managers. And then you actually broad-base the learning through other exposures. And I think that's really where the intervention should be. But we experimented with that, and I'll tell you the challenge which I have always argued with my other colleagues from IT companies was that how do we all of us come to the same platform? Each one of us, intent is right, but we want to do our own stuff, right? And when it comes to intervention at the academic institutes, part of it is branding, which I can understand, but it's a lot of ways, and they also get tired. I mean, you ask the academic institutes, look, Wipro comes one day, TCS comes another day, Cognizant, and all of them actually come, and we have to actually be humoring all of you all together. Why don't you all come to one platform through NASSCOM or whichever is the body, right? And begin to actually intervene and pool in your resources and investments. So there are some good moves being made there, even though it's late in the day, but to be able, and where exactly can we intervene is the question. I mean, our job is not to actually design necessarily the course curriculum. It's not about infrastructure or anything, but there is a space for us to actually intervene in terms of how do we upgrade the teaching faculty in those institutes, because the reality is that the best teachers do not go to those schools to teach, right? And if you don't have them, you have more downstream problem. And therefore, how can we together be intervening there? And so to cut the story short, I mean, we have had exposure there working along with NASSCOM as a very progressive industry body, and I think we made some difference. It should have happened a lot sooner and a lot earlier, is my own personal view.
That's interesting, Sagrika. It's a very different space that you operate in retail, and soft skills. And soft skills are very much necessary in the space that you operate in. What's been your experience?
Before I say this, I think I liked what Prateek said, that we have made a move forward. So is India doing enough? I would like to say that no and yes. No, because I just heard the data. NSDC was telling me that they had done a research, and they say that I wouldn't dare to talk about data, but almost close to 350 million shortage of skilled labor by 2020. And and the data is various, where they say that we'll have, NASSCOM does trains lakhs of engineering graduates, but less than 10% or 20% can be employed because of communication skills, etc., etc. The good thing, the yes part, is that in my experience, organizations have now, and I like this, this connotation, that we are now ready to take talent which is ready to cook, rather than what we used to be on ready to eat. So we wanted somebody, a talent who's ready to be billable, ready to work, ready to bring business, ready to get onto work. Now we are at least opening our eyes to see that, okay, now let's see. So this is my reality. How do I build skill? How do I get? I was reading a very interesting thing, like what Amtech does in US is almost 30 community colleges only work for an automotive industry, and that's where they provide. Germany does it very well. In fact, I saw them that almost all the interns they already knew which company they're going to work and how are they going to get skilled, so they're getting skilled as well as getting a job exposure at the same time. India is far away from that. I don't think so. I can, as being a part of a retail industry, can say that I'll hire you and see how you get skilled on the way. So it doesn't work like that. But yes, the baby steps have begun, and it's not only soft skills. It is like we have a very niche skill called butchers. You know, you will not hear of them. Today, butchers is not, you don't hear of butchers, and butchers is a very specialized skill category. You don't get people. So what we are doing right now is getting people, getting them trained by the ladder chef, and making sure that we are making them employable. And it's not just one, it's even getting the cashier. So it's leadership, training, development is a second phase. Your grassroots level is a question mark at this stage. That how do you get that kind of people who can manage with the business space and also grow as your leaders? Because in my organization, we have a very clear leadership talent review, and we believe in growing people from within. So you also have to make sure that they come from a good pedigree. They have a kind of so when in an organization, when the revenue is a question mark, you know, like I go back to the no that, yes, where do you find time and money for expenses for the training? So, so it's a very, it is a double whammy, and I personally feel that organizations are yet to come to that maturity level where we would say that no, we look at it as an investment. And I think like it's easy to say in a forum here when when we say, okay, yes, we look at it as an investment, but when it comes to hardcore investment, when it comes to survival, when it comes to making sure that it's next year's business expansion, then where do we take a call? I think that is where is the question amongst all of us, and I don't think so we are still doing enough. What we are trying to do is making sure that we have a rigorous training program, and right now we believe in 70-20-10, which is for the capability development, which means 70% of it is on-job training, coaching, and 10% of it in various other, we have our own house of learning, which has a large training institute. So I'm sure every organization is doing their bit to make sure that you keep your attrition under control, you keep the talent growing within your organization, and you make sure that the company grows with that. Another thing which I wanted to say that in Metro, I have started to lead a business called Kirana 2 to 6. Kirana 2 to 6 means 2 lakh to 6 lakh rupees is their revenue, total revenue. And I had never been to a grocery shop, and I'm ashamed to admit it, but you know, as girls, you never go out and buy grocery. My father or brothers did it, and now somebody else does it. But when I went there, and I think that is also Manish and I were actually speaking, I went there, Kiranas still don't look at their successors as their daughters or their wives or somebody helping. They're still looking at, if they don't have a son, then they really don't know how they want to grow that business. So it's a very interesting thing that while we talk of skill, training, and we say, are we doing enough? I don't think so we are doing enough. Of course, we are trying.
So she's introduced an interesting gender perspective to this whole diversity perspective to this. Do you have anything to share?
Sure. So it seems like, probably coming from another planet, right? I mean, almost, but it's the duality, I think, of, the reality, right, of what India is at this point of time, right? There's very different dichotomies and realities, I think, for all of us. Right, coming to Cisco, I think we are at a different space. When we talk about inclusion and diversity, I think we talk about, multi-generation. Of course, I think we had a little bit of reference to that within the previous panel as well, right? 60% of Cisco India today is within Generation Y, right? And that's pretty unique for us across Cisco globally, right? Where the bulk of the population is actually a Generation X, right? So trying to introduce practices, concepts, right, within our leadership, especially around how do they continue to attract, retain, engage, right, Generation Y populations. So one of the things that we do is around reverse mentoring, right, especially for our leaders, because we want them to be learning from, the new college grads, the new campus hires, right? We talk about training campus grads, but then for us, it's extremely important that our leaders learn from Generation Y that has just joined Cisco, right? Around what is it that their aspirations are, what are their expectations, and how do they want to be managed, right? So that helps us because our leaders then and managers become better leaders and managers, right? So that's around generations. Gender diversity, of course, is a big piece for us, and there's a lot of work that we do with our people managers, right around enabling them to understand, because very often they end up talking about gender diversity and other pieces of diversity in the
And
aspect
also
of
women don't
quotas.
voluntarily sort of come out and say that this is, you know,
Yeah, so
where
there's
I probably need help.
sensitization. Yeah, the sensitization as well of the women that we have, and we do a lot of that through what we call our employee resource groups. So there's something called Cisco Connected Women, and we do a lot of sensitization programs, right, for both our women employees as well as for the managers of these employees, right? Because as I said, again, very often they see it as a quota, and we want to take it away from a quota conversation to a meritocracy conversation, to a genuine inclusion conversation, to a genuine learning and development and growth conversation, right? The other piece, which recently we are seeing some roadblocks and we're trying to work around that, is around the whole, you know, orientation piece around GLBT, right? And which, as you know, right, thanks to the recent Supreme Court rulings, we are finding that there's some roadblock, but at the same time, we continue to communicate to our workforce, many of whom potentially are oriented differently, right? And how do we continue to create a safe and inclusive environment for them as well, right? And so there are many different aspects to diversity, and it's not just around numbers as a game, around metrics as a game, but around how do we continue to harness inclusive talent, right, such that they continue to build, right, the workforce, where at the end of the day, the customer for Cisco is not likely to be one size fits all. Right, the customers for us could be urban, they could be rural, they're in different geographies, right? They come from very different backgrounds. Many of them use our products, right? And so if you continue to have one size fits all workforce, right? I mean, that's not going to meet our business needs. And so that's really the business case that we keep making, and we're continuing to work around training, awareness, as well as coaching for our leaders.
Manish, I can't resist saying this, but you know, companies like Cisco, Metro Cash and Carry, Wipro, all of us have Accenture. IBMs have all very good programs which supports not only gender diversity and talk of inclusion in inclusive workplaces. But in my research, I really figured out it's only 20% of the entire workforce or the companies which are looking at these issues in a more serious manner. And I think it's not about us. It's about a lot more people, and I will not share the data. I think I'll keep it with you that every day there is reducing numbers, and it's alarming. So while it's, we are lucky to be in company where inclusion and diversity and LGBT issues are taken more sensitively, but it's only large corporations who are doing it in that manner, and very few sensitive organizations, especially NGOs, etc., are even managing to, keep abreast. So with that, I think.
I had a question for Sagarika. This is with regard to, since you represent the retail space, all of us have a mindset in terms of looking at just graduates for employment. Now, is there any attempt made to try and get 12th pass into the system and have something like earn and learn sort of a scheme by which they finish graduation?
Yes, we do. In fact, all our associates, like people, if you go to the store, people who are helping you are all 10 standard pass. So we help them not only with getting their 12 standard, we also make sure that they have their certifications in the retail space. We have English speaking classes. We also train them in a few German because we are German MNC. So to make sure that they are, when they raise up the ladder, they are, in fact, our board member who's an expatriate with the company for over 20 years had started as a associate at the store. So we have the CFO who's been an account assistant with Metro. So we have a robust
it's working well
talent.
for you.
It's working very well for us. It's working very well for us, but we do have challenges. We have, and I wouldn't want to negate the kind of effort each organization is putting in making sure that they have the future-ready organization. But yet, I think we are lagging far behind because it is pluses and minuses. There are union challenges. There are there are loads of other things which I think manufacturing, retail, and all these large sectors and unorganized sectors facing today, which I'm sure Manish is very tempted to answer.
I could just add that if there's one thing we're not doing enough and which actually represents an alignment of financing and delivery is apprenticeships. So at the Prime Minister's Skill Council, India only has 3 lakh apprentices. Germany has 3 million, Japan has 10 million, China has 20 million, and learning by doing and learning by doing. Because of a stupid apprenticeship act written in 1961, which treats an apprenticeship as an employment rather than a classroom, corporate India has been unwilling to engage. But the state of Queensland in Australia has 25,000 employers. In India, we formally only have 26,000 employers engaging with the apprenticeship system. And I would urge, people who are sitting on the fence, and I'm sort of talking with a different hat now, I chair the Board of Apprenticeship Training, I think that there's a lot more we can do, and we will be reaching out, obviously, from the Board of Apprenticeship Training to everybody, but, you can take employees for a test drive, you bump his resume in a way that no theoretical training can when you give him an apprenticeship. I think there are many upsides for apprenticeship, and there is an alignment of you being able to take him for a test drive so the financing issue sort of gets sorted out. So this is one thing which has been debated a lot. Ministry of Labour has an antibiotic reaction to any changes to the Apprenticeship Act, but I think we've now finally got to the point where we have been able to put in some programs which are much more flexible, are much more open, and are completely legit. They've been notified in the Gazette, and so if corporate India can take that 3 lakh number to 10 million very easily, I mean, if we had the same percentage of our labor force working, Germany has 3.7% of their labor force, we would have 15 million apprentices in India. We only have 3 lakh. In fact, Apprentice Act reform was the 20th point program in Indira Gandhi's 20-point program in 1975. So this is not something which is new, this is not something which is unknown, and I think it represents a confluence of self-interest and people supply chain test drive, which was what corporate India has been looking for some time. So if there is any area, and I know a lot of people feel the government's not letting him do it, but everybody in the government feels corporate India doesn't want to do it, and there's a bit of a sort of there's a clearinghouse problem here, and that's really what we're trying to create in something called National Employability Through Apprenticeship Program, which has just been notified. And I would urge all of you to think about it or reach out, because apprentices are a way that you will build your supply chain in a way that is not financially or fiscally difficult when you're thinking about today, tomorrow.
So Manish, you probably got somebody signing up. Sure. Would love to have an offline conversation. But once again, to your point, right? When we talk about our campus grad intake, about 67 to 75%, averaging around 70-72%, of our new graduates are returning from internship programs that they've done with us the previous year, right? So that's the route we take, right, from a learning and development standpoint, largely because, they spent 6 months with us as interns. Obviously, we also take a lot of effort to understand what their experience, what goes into their experience, not just development during those 6 months. And then, typically we see a return of around 70%, right, coming back. And that actually is the bank that we bet on, right, so to speak, in terms of our graduate hiring. But I would love to explore further options around the apprenticeship program.
So, this has been a great melting pot of ideas and different thought streams that have come through. So, I would like to throw open this floor for questions. Anyone who would like to ask, and please, if you wish to ask it of a specific person, do feel free to address your question to the person. Yeah, there is a question.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. My name is Dharmanandana. I am from Toyota. My question is to Mr. Manish and Mr. Pratik. I represent automobile industry, unlike most of members who are from software industry. We enjoy the attrition levels much better than what software companies have. we enjoy to the extent of under 2% of attrition. And when it comes to training, especially at the blue collar level, it's more of a standardized work. So it is, I'm not sure how much beyond that we can go for training. So I would want your insights on what is that we can do beyond this standardized training for the blue collar jobs. Thank you.
You know, because of my double hatting, I have a sense of where you're coming from in terms of my question and the industry. The company I lead belongs to pretty much the core of manufacturing sector. The difference, I would actually point, and I'm not in complete agreement with you because you did mention that A, the attrition is low, and B, beyond the standard programs, what you can do. Well, I tell you, there is one clear shift, and all of us have read about, all of us have heard about that for a very long time, we felt that India has really missed the opportunity we had to become a very strong manufacturing hub, right? And which IT was able to establish itself. But that's changing, and that's changing because of a lot of other external factors. And people are seeking another strong alternative to China, and we have already seen how companies from India are beginning to export. What's underlying that is very clearly the expectation on new thresholds of global quality, right, which people are expecting. Now, it's not the same. My same product, which earlier could actually get accepted in another environment, and since you are from the auto industry, you would be able to relate to. You go out today and actually try and get good welders, right, who are trained in robotic welding, right? I'm telling you, you will struggle. You actually get those people in and you'll realize that, and you know, the sensitivity to slight increase in salary, which is very easy to actually lure them away. I mean, they do not actually stay, they actually move on. And today, while you know the larger manufacturing hub effort, which is now being put in place, and you know even the National Skill Development Council and what they are trying to work towards, to be able to identify what are some of those core skills. We set up a plant where we spent close to almost about 250 crores, and there is a very important element of that which you would be familiar is the plating technology. And when we started looking for experts in plating technology, we could not. We went to the IITs. They don't teach plating technology still. We wanted to actually get people who are actually experts in heat treatment, right? Not at an operating level. You do not actually find them. So the point being made is, if we have now an ambition, it just cannot be an element of so many people available and I can train them. The expectation, if we have to play in the global playing field, there is a certain threshold expectation of quality, and for that, I do not think we are adequately ready. So there is lot still. The onus falls on, again, in a minor way compared to IT, on the organizations to do it, but that's by itself and by themselves alone. Maybe some of the large manufacturing houses, they do it brilliantly, but if you're talking about the whole SMEs who are part of your own supply chain and they have to be upgraded, I think there has to be a lot better orchestration where today it is not touching at all. So we do get a little carried away and colored by what's happening in the air-conditioned buildings of IT. But if we have to progress as a nation, manufacturing has to deliver. And for manufacturing has to deliver, we got to actually have a view on a global scale. And today, that's somewhere that dialogue is getting actually submerged. So we have a lot to do.
I mean, I could just support him. The IT, it's all about productivity. The IT industry is 0.5% of India's labor force. It's 5% of India's GDP. India, only 12% of our labor force works in manufacturing, which is the same as the US, which is post-industrial. It makes no sense absolutely. And China has run out of farm labor. So I don't know whether you saw it, Foxconn just announced they'll be going 2,000 kilometers inside China to set up a factory to pay the same wages. So Arthur Lewis got the Nobel Prize for his work on when a country runs out of farm labor. And China has crossed the Lewisian turning point, and they're going to Vietnam right now. But if India sort of wants to sort of become the workshop of the world, which I think we do have a chance to, I think the manufacturing skills, there are many components of India's 12% manufacturing employment. Obviously, the most important one is infrastructure, and then there's regulatory cholesterol. But manufacturing skills are a very important component of that, and the welding skills or the CNC machine. I mean, manufacturing isn't what it used to be, as you know if you work at Toyota, but most of corporate India doesn't know that, right? I mean, the average size of 80% of India's textile production is in companies with less than 15 employees. 80% of China's textile production is in companies with more than 300 employees. So we have a lot of dwarfs. We don't have babies. You know, the average, it's okay to have lots of babies who will grow, but most of manufacturing in India is done in subscale enterprises with not much capital, with very low productivity. So I think the biggest role that companies like Toyota can act as lighthouses of what you consider low-level standard manufacturing is actually not par for the course for most of Indian manufacturing. And that, if we don't take that 12% of India's labor force to 30, 40%, I mean, we will have a problem. You know, 10 lakh kids will join the labor force every month for the next 20 years. So our demographic dividend means 1 million kids will join the labor force every month. So manufacturing skills are key to our demographic dividend.
Any other question?
Hi, good evening. My name is Abhishek. My question is again to Manish. Since you represent a third-party organization which deals with the training programs, I would like to understand, we have, apart from the organization which are already there into the consideration, we have mid-size organization and the companies who are also lacking in terms of the finances. How do we persuade or stimulate the need of these kind of organizations to go for the training or learning and development kind of programs? And the other question is, where do you see 2020 as in the platform for third-party training organizations?
I'm not sure I got your first question.
I'll just
how do you
it.
convince somebody who doesn't want to do training to spend on training?
I'll just repeat it again. There are two aspects when an organization go towards learning and development. There is one is the investment which we take, we consider, and the other one is the ROI on those learning and development programs. So how do we persuade those needs or address these factors when we attract these kind of companies towards the learning and development programs?
I think if there is no ROI, there is no ROI. I think it is very difficult to convince somebody to spend on training if it's unclear that it impacts productivity. And most companies know when they're getting productivity. So I'm not sure I can answer your first question because it depends on the company, it depends on the industry, it depends on its margins, it depends on whether it's India as a market or India as a production base. I think that's very context specific. Overall in manufacturing, because India is only 12% of the labor force, only 12% of our labor force is manufacturing. That has been a challenge to get manufacturing skills to be either marketable. See, learning has two values. One is the learning value and the other is the signaling value. See, you can be like IITs and IIMs with tight entry gates and wide open exit gates. Or you can be like the chartered accountant exam with wide open entry gates and tight exit gates. Most training in India has wide open entry gates and wide open exit gates, right? So the signaling value is important. If you're thinking of CCNA has signaling value. See, or most great institutions, I went to Wharton, that's a good place to be at, but it's a better place to be from. So you've got to think about your training as signaling value. I think that's important. Most people don't recognize the signaling value of education, maybe 60-70% of the value of education in many circumstances. The second question is easy to answer. I mean, it's the biggest entrepreneurial opportunity in the planet in the next 20 years. Fixing India's people supply chain is going to be the biggest entrepreneurial opportunity in the planet in the next 20 years, whether that's within companies, whether that is for the government, or whether that is at individual retail levels. But there is a challenge in training, right? The private sector has a trust deficit, the government sector has an execution deficit, and the not-for-profit sector has a scale deficit. But somebody's going to figure out this problem, and in 20 years, this is going to be a massive industry.
So I'd like to give an example, Manish, and probably you're familiar with this already, right? So for many, many years, and this is, again, more relevant to the previous organization that I used to work with, which was Intel, right? They had a fairly large R&D organization in India, some amount of sales and marketing, and constantly the conversation used to be, right, when do we get manufacturing of silicon, right, which is basically what they do, into India, right? And I think it was a 5 to 7 year conversation for the period of time that I was there, where they wanted, there was a vision, there was an intent to get there, but they felt that, you know, some of the other parties, right, in this whole fray were not necessarily walking the talk or, you know, getting to the meeting point that they wanted to get to. I think the great news that I've read very recently is that there are a couple of parks that we're going to be setting up, right, in India, and I think this is close to Calcutta. Of the two companies that I believe are going to be investing, I forget the name of one, but the other is ST Microelectronics, where they're planning to set up, right, a plant out here, which I think is a great first step forward, that they're able to get to that point, right? And I think there's a fair amount of government handholding that's going to be taking place over the next several years.
Okay, so that was a bonus. You got a specific example as well. Is there any other question? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Rajiv. Prateek, you mentioned about some collective action that is being taken through NASSCOM to create a larger base of job-ready people, if that's what I understood. Could you just comment a little more on those initiatives and whether the institutes that are actually, you know, developing these resources are equally receptive to those initiatives? Thank you.
So one of my big learning, as I was part of what started as an internal initiative, which we used to call it as Mission 10X. And why 10X? Because, you know, it's that quantum leap which we wanted to take. And, you know, as Manish mentioned, we realize all other problems are solvable for us. But if we are not able to actually address the, you know, folks who are coming out of the engineering schools and they are better equipped to handle the realities of organization of tomorrow, we will fail. So that started as an initiative. And my biggest learning was that we found we were a little hesitant and to an extent skeptical how the academic institutes would take to, you know, one more initiative. And I tell you, you begin to speak to those people, you realize there is a great degree of openness, right? In that bureaucracy of, you know, all the stipulations in which they exist, they also, and there are well-intentioned people who want to, right? Who want to actually make a change, who want to make a difference, who want to actually participate along with you. And I think that's just right kind of fillip or encouragement which we were seeking to actually partner along. Specifically, what did we do? And we realized that you need to intervene in terms of how do you upgrade the quality of the teaching faculty, right? Because if you get that right, and this is more of an upstream problem, you will be able to see the impact of it downstream. Now, from our point of view, we knew that where we are intervening, we may not be the beneficiary. Someone else could be the beneficiary. But over a period of time, and as we actually speak today, we have been at this initiative for almost about 8 to 9 years. We would have trained close to about 35,000 teachers across, and at our cost, right? And the question obviously internally used to get asked is that, look, how do you think the industry is benefited or have we benefited? But whatever little we have been able to do is still is a small drop. And what do we do there? We actually help people to actually get trained in the art of, in terms of, you know, collaborative learning, right? So how can they actually, as you go through in the classrooms, right, in the engineering schools, through the instructional design, you begin to actually impart a lot of other skills, skills of communication, skills of learning from each other, skills of being able to actually work in teams. And that collaborative learning mode is something which we have never been used to. I mean, ours is very instructional, very rote learning which is there. And as we went through the journey very quickly, is we realized that a lot of other like-minded companies are thinking along in a similar manner, right? And they're also doing things which in design and intent is not very different. And that's the time when Som, when he was at NASSCOM a few years back, we approached and said, we as in Wipro was saying that, look, Why don't you just formalize as an initiative? And we are okay. I mean, we are not here for branding. I don't want Wipro Thappa to be there, which will say that it's a Wipro-led initiative. Let it be NASSCOM-led. Let all of us come. Let's all of us pool our resources and be able to take it forward. So NASSCOM stepped up. There are companies and a few who were there in the earlier panel as well. They came together. And I think it made progress. I mean, obviously it has its own bumps and it has its own high. But today there is a body through whom we actually dialogue. At the other end, you have the academia, which is able to actually engage with us, and together we are able to actually reach out to the policy makers if we want to actually make any specific change.
Yeah, so great. This was a great session, and thanks a lot. And if you do have more questions, you can certainly ask the panelists over dinner.
So I had one very small question for Mr. Prasad, which is that at one point in time when I was young, not so young anymore, at that time a probationary officer job in banks used to be a dream job for people, but now it's IT. So is banking still getting the best people?
I do believe that we are able to attract good quality people. It's only a question of the perspectives have changed as it has changed in other industries too. It's no longer a 2-decade perspective. It is possibly a 3 to 5 year perspective. That's the reality of the industry today.